Hello there, it's Sarah from Paper Lovely. Thanks for joining me today. As requested, this is going to be a slowed down version showing you how to create that stitched little mini journal from my last video. So before we get started, I wanted to give you a quick look at that Martha Stewart kit that I used. There I was showing you the instructions all come together, and then it has the supplies to make 3 different small journals. So that first one was sort of a zigzag fold. This one was made by putting a bunch of envelopes together. And then the third one I'll show you here is what I'm going to show you how to make today, only in a smaller version, and it's slightly different. That one is the stitched binding. So you can't really see the stitching except for in the center because it has this tape on the back of it, but it's pretty much the same as what I'm going to show you how to make today. So to start off, we're going to trim out our covers, and I'm using 3 different papers from the Flourish collection. So these start out measuring 8 by 6, and I'm going to trim this down to 4 by 6, so I'll get 2 covers out of each one of these sheets. And then I've got some regular computer paper, and I'm going to trim this down to slightly smaller. So there you can see I took my paper to the 6-inch mark and just moved it 1/8 of an inch over, and then took it to the 4-inch mark and moved it 1/8 of an inch over. So we're doing 5 7/8 and 3 7/8, and that's going to create the somewhat smaller insert so that our pages don't stick out on the outside of our covers. Now I had a few additional papers. These had actually come to me in a swap bot exchange, so I thought it would be fun to mix these in a little bit. So I've got this grid paper. I was able to get 3 inserts out of this, and then I took that invoice paper and was able to get 3 different cuts of those. Now I'm taking my cover, scoring that right down the middle at the 3-inch mark, and then I had to go back to my cutter board because I was scoring on a 16th, so I didn't have that line on my scoreboard. So again, I'm taking that to the 3-inch mark, and then I will move that 1/16 of an edge over, so it's really 2 15/16, and then I will score down the middle. So here I grabbed 1 of each of my covers, and I'm just going to take my bone folder and crease those. So now we've got all our separate elements and we can start putting the books together. I've got my computer pages and my grid paper and my invoice paper. It worked out that I had one of the invoice paper, and then I think 3 computer pages, and then the grid paper and another 3. So I've scored those in 2 separate packets. I'm going to place those together. And there you can see that you're not going to have a completely straight edge just because the outside is going to have to cover more than the inside pages. So I'm lining up my ruler there, just taking off a 1/16 of an inch, and I am taking my craft knife along the ruler. I am not pressing very hard at all. I'm just making several swipes across until I feel that I've hit my craft mat, and that gives you a really nice clean edge there. So I'm just double checking to make sure that fits okay. So now I'm going to take my cover and I'm going to create the holes for our stitch spine. I'm placing 1 in the center and 1 at either end, and then I will place 1 in between each of those. So 5 holes total, and I'm using my We Are Memory Keepers Brad Setter piercing tool for that. And then I'll go through all of those holes again just to make sure that they are wide enough to fit my needle. Then I'm going to take my packet and I'm going to line that up with the cover along the spine, just making sure I have an even edge on all 4 sides. And then I'll take my binder clips and place 1 on either end just to keep that nice and tight. And I'll take that piercing tool and I will go right down all 5 of those holes again so that my hole is all the way through those pages. Next, we're going to stitch it together. So I am taking a length of some cotton twine, and this is about 20 inches long. And I'll thread that on my needle, and then we're going to go in an over-under pattern. So however large your book is, you want to start at the hole right beneath the center hole. So I like to have my closure knot on the outside. So if you want your knot on the outside, then you have to leave your tail on the outside. If you prefer to have it hidden on the inside, then you would start the opposite direction and you would go inside out, leaving the tail on the inside. So I'm going to go down that next hole, which just happens to be my last hole since this is so small. And then I'm going to wrap that around. I'll go back through that same hole. And I'm going to continue in an under-over pattern. So since I went down this hole, I'm going to go up the next one. And then I'll go down the next one, just keeping that nice and taut as I go along. I'll come up the next one, and here's where you can really see the over-under pattern, because you're going to leave that space open for now. So you go down the top hole, and then again you'll wrap around and you'll go back down through that same hole to complete our sewn line. We'll come back up the next one. And then back down that center. And so here you'll see we have our complete stitch line on the inside. And on the outside we just have that little gap. And that's going to complete our line. We're going to knot those two together up at the center, and that'll give us that fully stitched look. So I just do a double knot and then one more knot just to make sure it's extra secure. So tying that 3 times. And this is just like, you know, if you would tie a ribbon on a present, you just want to keep that as tight down to the seam as you possibly can. I'll go ahead and trim off my excess there, and that is going to complete the basic journal. So some additional things you can do is I like to round the corners on this. I'm going to go ahead and score this really well. I think the best way to keep these nice and flat would be to stick it between 2 large books overnight, and I think that would do it for a day or 2. I'm going to round my corners here, and the way I do it is I take the whole section of the inserts and round each of those corners together, and then I will do the cover, all of those corners separately on their own. Now I like the look of the knot on the outside, but if you noticed on the Martha Stewart one, they actually had some, it was sort of like a fabric tape. I'm not exactly sure what it's called, but I had some paper tape here. This is from 7 Gypsies, and I thought this would look really nice with the pattern. So I'm peeling that off and placing that across the center of my spine. And then I'll just wrap that around, making sure that's nice and smooth, and I'll trim off the excess. And that would cover up the knot if you didn't like that so much. If you decide to use some type of tape or washi tape on this, I would suggest you use something that's a little larger than 1/2 inch. That's going to give you much better coverage. And there is the finished journal. So I'm going to take you through that process one more time. I've got my cover here, and I'm going to take my piercing tool. I'll place a hole in the middle, 1 on either end, and then 1 in between each of those, so 5 holes total. And then I'll take that piercing tool down in each of those holes again to make sure that they are wide enough to fit my needle. I'm going to take my paper inserts and I'll place them inside, lining up the spines and just making sure that there's an even amount of edge on either side of it. I'll go ahead and secure those with my binder clips, and then I'll place that down and I will poke through all of those holes again to make sure it goes through all of my inserts. I'm going to cut off a length of this string, about 20 inches will do it. I'll thread my needle. And then if you want your knot on the outside of the cover, you're going to start leaving your tail on the outside. If you would prefer to have it on the inside, you're going to leave your tail on the inside. And you're going to start in the hole directly below your middle hole. I'm going to bring my thread up through, and then I will bring it down through the next hole. Since that's my last hole, I'm going to wrap that around, come back down through that same hole, and then continue in my over under pattern. So since I went down that hole, I'm going to come up the next one, and then I'll go down the center. I'll come up the next one, and here you can see that over under pattern. We're going to leave that space blank, go down the next hole. Since that's my last one again, I'm going to wrap that around to the front, and I'll go down the exact same hole. Keeping that nice and tight. I'll come up the next hole. I'll go down the center. That's going to complete all our stitching on the inside. And then I'll have my two tails on the outside. You can see that gap there, and when I tie those two tails together, that will create the full binding on the outside. Again, I'll knot that as tight as I can, just as if you were wrapping a present. And I'll go ahead and trim off the excess. I'll go ahead and round my corners. Again, I round all of the inserts together, and then I will do all of the cover corners separately. So at this point, the books really are completed. I actually like them plain better than decorated, but I wanted to show you some different options. So I'm going to grab this butterfly sticker, and I'll add that to this white patterned paper. And then for the hummingbirds, I wanted to be able to see those. I think they're so pretty. So I just went with a sentiment sticker, and then I realized I placed that right on top of a smaller hummingbird. So I'm going to move that up to the top. And in the final photo, you'll see that I did actually add an additional sentiment underneath that, just for a little something more. And then I finished up this gray and gold journal with that grow sticker. So that will complete our 3 mini journals. I've got a couple of close-ups for you here. Of course, there'll be additional photos and a list of supplies at my blog post, linked in the description below. If you enjoyed the video, please leave me a comment or a thumbs up and subscribe for more. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.